set?
Yes,
Okay.
ready to go.
All right, good morning. I'm Linda Feldmann, Washington Bureau Chief of the Christian Science Monitor. Our guest today is McCaul, the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. He also represents the greater Austin and Houston areas of Texas in Congress, and this is his third appearance at a Monitor breakfast, though it's his first as Foreign Affairs Committee chair. Chairman McCaul has appeared twice before as head of the House Homeland Security Committee, so I suspect we'll have some border questions for you.
Oh my.
So, welcome back. Chairman McCaul is a native of Dallas and a graduate of Trinity University and St. Mary's University Law School. Earlier in his career, he worked as a federal prosecutor, and then in 2004 ran for Congress, winning the first of now 10 terms. So again, welcome.
Thank you.
Now for the ground rules. We're on the record. Please, no live blogging or tweeting. In short, no filing of any kind while the breakfast is underway. And when we conclude at 10, the embargo is lifted. And we'll email pictures from this session to everybody here as soon as the event concludes. As you know, if you'd like to ask a question, just send me a signal, and I'll call on as many of you as time permits. Now, Chairman McCaul, if you'd like to make brief opening remarks, the floor is yours.
For how long?
Brief, 5 minutes. Yes, this is not the floor.
Well, there's so much to talk about. There's a supplemental going on. There's crises all around the world. If I could just maybe, I'll give you my thesis on the state of the world in 3 minutes. Or 5. I'm a big student of history, so I studied, World War II, my dad's war. My dad was a bombardier, B-17, bombed the Nazis, and I got to take my son over there to see his air base, and now Masters in the Air is on, and I'm really enjoying watching that. But the lessons, the parallels actually to 1939 and today are very real. As I went to Poland, with Greg Meeks, we saw the Ukrainian refugees pouring in, and in Poland they said, this is like 1939 to us. This is like Hitler invading Poland, and we have to look back historically. Chamberlain, Hitler, Chamberlain, Peace in Our Time, had the document. Hitler said it wasn't worth the paper it was written on, and then we saw Churchill talking about appeasement. Ronald Reagan, first president I got to vote for, peace through strength. And we can talk about how my party has maybe changed a bit from the isolationism that took place in the late 1930s to what we're seeing today is interesting as well, because Reagan was very outspoken against isolationism. He felt that we had to be the leader of the free world, and that was our responsibility. We couldn't shrink from that. And I think since the fall of Afghanistan, and we just had a hearing yesterday, I'll be having General Milley, General McKenzie. We're going to go have some very high-profile hearings on Afghanistan. To me, that was the beginning of the turning point in projecting weakness around the world. After Afghanistan, we saw very soon the Russian Federation moving in satellite imagery towards Ukraine. And we knew that the invasion was going to happen. We warned Ukraine, we warned our allies. Nobody believed us for the most part, but I think the UK did, and then it happened. It's all tied together. Prior to that, in February, Chairman Xi in Beijing at the Olympics met with Putin to form what I call the Unholy Alliance. This is the alliance between China and Russia. And Chairman Xi, as I talked to Asian countries, like I was with the ambassador from Japan yesterday, it's all what happens in Ukraine will impact directly what happens in Taiwan and Chairman Xi's calculation. Then to throw on top of that, I was with the Saudi ambassador last night, and we were talking a great deal about the Middle East. So now the Middle East is on fire again, and I think this is a distraction. In terms of Putin and Xi, they see this as a great opportunity, that a diversion for them, so that we take our eye off the ball of Ukraine and in Taiwan. And it's a serious threat in the Middle East. I was in Tel Aviv with the Prime Minister 2 weeks after the invasion of Hamas. He showed us the Hamas videos, and he said, I want you to take this back to your colleagues and show it to them to see what they did to my people and to never forget. And so I did. I showed it to all of our colleagues in the House. To end on maybe a more positive note, our discussions last night were, and I'll be traveling to Saudi in March to discuss the security agreement that's possible with the Saudis and Israel in the United States. I think the Arab world is ready for this, and if anything good could come out of a really bad situation, it could be a new paradigm shift in the Middle East, a new maybe alliance between something we never thought we'd see before, and that would be Saudis, who, that's Mecca, and the Muslim world and the Arab world align with Israel against what is now Iran and its proxies. And so, it's a very interesting time to chair this committee. I didn't create these crises, so don't hold me responsible for them, but they just seem to happen. But again, I think I do see a cause and effect between a projection of weakness and an invitation to aggression and conflict and war. I think when we project, always projecting strength keeps peace in the world. And I have serious concerns about where we are today and the possibility of a major scale world war like my dad's generation, the Pacific and then Europe, and now we have the Middle East as well. So I'll yield back,
Very
as we
good.
say in Congress.
Thank you for the brevity.
Thanks.
So I have to start with this morning's news, the apparent death of Alexei Navalny. Does this affect the dynamic at all of your drive and others to add funding to Ukraine? Just shows yet again what Putin is all about.
Yeah.
First of all, does that affect?
I mean, while there are some who seem to empathize with him and show affection for him, for Mr. Putin, I don't. I don't. I think that he is, he's a bad actor. The atrocities, the war crimes he's committed in Ukraine on a large scale, abducting all these children and holding them hostage and indoctrinating them is in violation of Geneva Convention. And now Navalny, a political prisoner for many years, and we have stood up for Navalny. We've also stood up for the Wall Street Journal reporter. You have one of your own now in a not gulag, but as a political prisoner of Putin and Russia. Shows you demonstrates what he's capable of doing. And it's a sad day, and I hope out of his death will come something to send a message to the world and to the American people about who Mr. Putin really is, and not to have this sort of charm offensive that Mr. Putin is somehow a misunderstood man, and that his intentions are very clear to me. Just like Hitler's were in Mein Kampf, Putin it's very clear to take over Ukraine, to invade. He'll invade Moldova. He'll go into Georgia, and then he'll start attacking in some form or fashion the Baltic nations. He's not stopping at Ukraine, and that's why, just like with Hitler, if we'd stopped him earlier, the blood and treasure we could have saved in my father's war would have been tremendous. And I just don't think you can discount these dictators and Chairman Xi as well, as he's looking at Taiwan and the Pacific.
Okay, one more on Russia and Russian opposition in particular. Have you ever met either Mikhail Khodorkovsky or Ilya Ponomaryov?
Yes.
You've met both?
Right. But, when you're battling a dictator, it's hard to win popular support. And same thing with China. Mm-hmm. All these countries have one thing in common. They're dictators. So Russia, China, Iran, with the Ayatollah, and North Korea. They're all allies And, you know, I find it amazing, and I have to explain this to members of Congress, that they're allies. So don't think, you know, if you don't like Communist China and Xi, you can't like Putin, because they're actually tied together. By the way, the Ayatollah, Putin invited Hamas to the Kremlin 2 weeks after the invasion. He literally had Hamas congratulating them at the Kremlin. And of course, North Korea, and we know the weapons systems are flying everywhere. All the drones that Iran's using that were provided by Russia and China. Now, Iran is making the drones for Russia to put into Ukraine. You know, and China is helping, and North Korea. I think this is I've never seen sort of this bifurcation, if you will, of like, you know, sort of evil dictators in the free West. You know, maybe since the Cold War, since Reagan's time, or going back to World War II.
Okay, one more on a Congress question. As you know, the bipartisan group from the House has drafted a compromise bill that combines defense-only aid for Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan, plus tightened border security for 1 year. So what's your position on that proposal?
I mean, it just came out last night. They didn't consult with the authorizers or appropriators, so I haven't really had a chance to scour through it. But some immediate concerns that I have is as I understand it, abolishing the foreign military financing program, which is a great foreign policy tool for this country. I sign off on all foreign military weapon sales. I think that's a very dangerous idea. The presidential drawdown authority that we're using for Taiwan right now, they eliminate that. That's a very dangerous idea. I don't think this is well thought out. Humanitarian assistance, been getting a lot of calls, like Cindy McCain, World Food Program. Like, there are ways to deal with humanitarian assistance, particularly in Ukraine and Gaza, that I think are more intelligent than just zeroing out the account. And then I'll deal with Gaza, and I'll talk about Ukraine. In Gaza, after the revelations that UNRWA had 10% of their employees are Hamas, and 12 of them were involved in the invasion into Israel, we think that we can do an alternative model, a pilot program, if you will, private NGOs like Catholic Charities, like World Food Program that Cindy McCain runs, and other NGOs that have a great track record to replace the UNRWA. It wouldn't happen overnight, but to replace that in Gaza. Secondly, in Ukraine, the government subsidies, I was talking to Lindsey Graham last night about this. We're working together on the Ukraine package. The idea that we could provide a loan program rather than an outright government subsidy. I think what the American people, they're supportive of the weapons, I think. They're not as supportive of government subsidies. And I think the loan program idea is a good one. Finally, the thing that they left out that I've been championing is the repo statute that I passed out of my committee, Senate Foreign Relations passed out of theirs, and that allows us to tap into the Russian sovereign fund assets that have been sanctioned. There's about 300, I want to say billion, if I'm mistaken, my staff needs to correct me, that could actually help pay not only for the efforts to push back on Russia, but also that could help pay for the reconstruction.
All right, lots to follow up on there, lots of other topics too, but we'll go around the room and ask some questions. Patricia Zengerle from Reuters.
Hi, thanks very much. Nice to see you again, sir, and thanks for taking the time to talk with us. If you could talk more about the Ukraine aid, do you think Navalny's death changes the narrative? And also, how do you think this is going to play out? I mean, will a package of Ukraine aid be passed by the House? And how will that happen? What do you think is the most likely way? I know you talked about different possibilities, but just...
Yeah.
Well, I'm going into my leadership conference, leaving tomorrow, and I'll be with the speaker. I've had conversations with him along with the Secretary General of NATO. There are some that I don't think can be persuaded because the narrative is so strong. I think the sort of brainwashing, if you will, that we have to choose between our southern border and Ukraine has been out there. I don't agree with that. I think it's a false dichotomy choice. I think we're a great nation. We can do both. And I live in Texas. But I think we have to explain to the American people why Ukraine is a national security interest and that it directly impacts China and it has an impact with our adversaries. If we abandon our NATO allies as we did in Afghanistan and surrender to Putin in Ukraine and allow him to invade neighboring countries, then where's the United States going to be? Weaker or stronger? I would argue far weaker. And then our allies won't trust us anymore. And our enemies won't fear us anymore. And that is a danger of pulling out 100% of Ukraine. I don't think some of my colleagues think about that.
What do you think the odds are of something actually passing, or Speaker Johnson?
I do think he's committed. I think we have to make it palatable, and that's why adding the repo provision is, I think, so important, because I know that in my conversation with the speaker, he's a huge fan of that. It's a pay for where Russia pays for its own war crimes, not the American taxpayer. Now, you couldn't tap into it immediately, but it sets the tone and the course. And so I think that and I think this loan program could be very helpful. And I know there's been some progress with the former president to talk about this that I think could be helpful as well. But at the end of the day, I do think there's still a majority in the House that will pass this. It just has to come to the floor. Now, the other issue is it will come with Israel and with Indo-Pacific and Ukraine all together, which would be my preference because it ties all the threats against the United States together. And we tried the border thing, and I can get into that later, but I prefer it to be tied together. But if not, I know that the Freedom Caucus wants it. They want all three separately on the floor.
Do you think the tragedy of Navalny's death, do you think that will have any impact on people? Will it change the discussion at all?
Well, to the extent members of Congress know who he is.
All right. John Gizzi from Newsmax across the table.
Thank you, Linda, for having this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for coming. Two questions. Is Israel going to strike at Iran based on the belief that Iran almost has a nuclear program in place?
Great. So a couple things on that. I've been with 160 strikes against our military in the Middle East with a very timid response. I told the administration, you need to, after they killed American servicemen and women, you need a strong response. And they chose some good IRGC targets in Iraq and Syria and Yemen, but they projected this strike a week in advance, gave IRGC time to retreat its assets. You don't give advance. We didn't do that with Soleimani, and that worked very effectively. And then when Soleimani was killed, everybody thought, oh my God, it's too provocative. And guess what? It was met with silence in the Iranian world. They understand one thing in that region, it's power. My advice, both publicly and privately to them, was to back channel to Iran that we will not tolerate the killing of Americans. And if you do this, then we're willing to strike inside of Iran. Going to the nuclear problem, now we had a special envoy for Iran, Mr. Malley, who, by the way, is now under FBI investigation for violations of security clearance. I tried to get him to testify several times, and then now I realized why he couldn't, and that was not disclosed to us. But that presents grave problems because he's in charge of the nuclear Iran deal. I think the administration has given up a lot for the nuclear Iran deal. Like, for instance, the sanctions against Iran on energy. $80 billion now have gone into Iran to fund terror because they have not enforced the sanctions. We passed the SHIP Act in my committee, and I passed the Crime Act on missiles and drones to block the exportation of missiles and drones, but also the SHIP Act to sanction the energy that's being sold primarily to China, and $80 billion now has gone into fund terrorism in Iran. Now, going to your ultimate question, they're getting very close to enrichment of uranium that could meet the requirements for a nuclear bomb. Iran is, and they can flip a switch from 60 to 90 overnight, and they're there. If you look at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, those bombs I think were 65% enrichment. So it's of grave concern. They don't have the capability to miniaturize a nuclear warhead, and thank God they'll buy us a little time, but they have the missiles, and now they're working on the ICBMs and hypersonics that they can maybe get from Russia and China, and then they put a nuclear warhead on that. So I've been shown the plans in the classified space of our ability to demolish their nuclear weapons bomb-making capability. The Israelis have capability. It's not as strong as ours. I would not recommend that we do this alone. I would not recommend Israel do it alone. It's just going to inflame that part of the world. It has to be an alliance with U.S., Israel, and our allies, which is why we can't abandon our allies in Ukraine. We'd have to be joined together on this. I passed a resolution on the floor for a specific purpose that says, it shall be the policy of the United States that a nuclear Iran is not acceptable. This has never been said before publicly. And what that says in diplomatic speak is that we will not accept a nuclear Iran, which means if you build a bomb, we will take it out. Very, very straightforward. And it was passed very, very bipartisan.
I was also going to ask one other question.
Okay, quickly.
Quickly, do you see a war eventually with Israel and Hezbollah?
God, I hope not. Hezbollah is the A team, and Hamas is the B or C team. Hezbollah has the rockets that could overpower the Iron Dome. And they've been firing rockets in, but to some extent have been somewhat restrained. And the intelligence I have, I don't think they're interested in getting into a full-fledged war, but they're just troublemakers. I mean, all these proxies, whether it be the Houthi rebels causing problems in the Red Sea with shipping, Hamas major invasion, which I think there was prior warnings of this, but Hezbollah has the capability to really cause problems. And so I think deterrence, again, is the key here. What the Ayatollah, he doesn't question our military might. What he does question is our political will, and specifically the commander-in-chief. Does he have the political will to strike back and provide the deterrence and the strength necessary to stop this aggression that we're seeing?
Howard LaFranchi from the Monitor, to your right.
Yes, so in your introduction, you spoke about the trajectory of your own party from isolationism of the 30s to Ronald Reagan. And so I'm wondering how you explain the kind of return that certain aspect of the party, certain part of the party, a return to that isolationism. And what do you think can clearly you're not in favor of that, so what can you do as a party member and involved in foreign affairs to reverse that?
Well, first I have to understand it to argue, and then I have to look at history as my guide. And the reason why we had isolationism in the late 1930s is because we had World War I. And Americans they didn't want to die in a European war again. World War I was very catastrophic and brutal. And so most of the, we have a very young membership in the Congress now. A lot of them never even lived through the Cold War. So they have no personal experience with the Cold War. What they have a personal experience with are these forever wars, and that being Iraq and Afghanistan. So they equate what's happening in Ukraine with Russia, a world power, or Taiwan and Chairman Xi, a world power, with the, I would say, little wars, the forever wars of Iraq and Afghanistan. And I get that. They don't want us to get pulled into another, as Washington would say, foreign entanglement. I think it's paramount, and the administration's failed to explain why is this in our national security interest. And the other thing that's made it difficult, the administration has really mismanaged their handling of this conflict. And I'll give you a good, it's too provocative. They wouldn't put in the Stingers in the beginning. And then there was a HIMARS, which is these launch missiles. Oh, we can't put in fighter jets like F-16s and this and that. And they finally come around to a lot of stuff. But for God's sakes, it's been 2 years. And I tell Jake Sullivan and Secretary Austin, you're going so slow, you're not giving them everything they need to win. And what's going to happen is it's a war of attrition, which is precisely what Putin wants. And they're giving Putin what he wants, a stalemate that will erode the will of the American people. And guess what? That's exactly what's happened. And it's hard in my party to go back home and say, well, I support, this president's efforts in Ukraine when he's completely mishandled it. And one final example are the ATACMS, which I'm putting in this supplemental. Those are the longer range artillery that they refuse to put in, that the Ukrainians are begging for. What would those do? It would allow them longer range artillery that would hit the bridge between Russia and Crimea and completely blow up the Russian supply line and create a moral victory for the Ukrainians. But for whatever, I get all these different excuses like, well, we don't have enough in our stockpile. We have to reserve that for a war with Russia, which, what do you think this is? I mean, finally, if the commander, or let's say Chairman of Joint Chiefs came to me 2 years ago and said, you know what, we can wipe out 50% of the Russian military with less than 5% of our Pentagon budget and not one American soldier, would you sign up for that plan? I would say yes. But they don't see Russia as our adversary anymore. And there's so much disinformation that's come from Russia into the American press that they are empathetic and sympathetic with Putin.
Julian Borger from The Guardian.
Thanks very much. I want to know if Donald Trump wins the next election, then you'll have a president who clearly does not believe in NATO as an ally, which sort of has a pay-for-play attitude towards it. How do traditional conservative Republicans like yourself believe in strong defense? What do you do? Would you be able, in Congress, to sort of save NATO?
Well, so we go back to our playbook from in the prior administration. And it was Pompeo, National Security Advisor O'Brien, and others. And they would bring people like myself in, or Lindsey Graham. And it's important you have his ear to make sure he doesn't get off the reservation. So on the NATO piece, I think what he's saying, if I could try to translate it, is, look, he's very transactional. Trump is. And that goes back to his business dealings. But, if what he's saying is we're not going to support a NATO country if they don't meet their obligations of 2% of GDP. Now, that's his way of really forcefully going in and just saying, you guys got to step it up. It's your backyard. So, and that it does have an impact. And I'll have to say, since that speech he gave when he went to NATO, he did kind of scare them. I mean, at least people, kind of Lisa Rice always told me, you want everybody to love you if they're not, but if they don't, you want to respect you. If they don't, you want them to fear you. Well, there's a fear factor, and there's an unpredictability factor with Trump. You don't know what he's going to do. But I would say with NATO, what we've seen, though, that needs to be reported more is that the majority of NATO countries have stepped up to the 2%. And now Finland and Sweden in NATO are above 2%. And they have a great military might to bring to the table. And now the rest of the countries, I just got briefed yesterday, are on track to come up to 2% by the end of this year. And I think once they've met that threshold, I think a lot of Americans just look at, why are we paying for this? We've been paying for it forever, and the NATO alliance is to curb Russian aggression, and they ought to be paying their fair share.
If Trump wins the election in November, would you be willing to serve in his administration?
I mean, if asked, I don't know if I would.
Would you consider it?
I consider it. The track record's been interesting with former cabinet.
Secretary of State, Homeland Security.
I would have to have a serious conversation to make sure that I could advance my world vision. Yeah.
Lisa Desjardins from PBS NewsHour to my left.
Thank you so much.
Sorry,
Thanks to both
back.
of you. It is a wild time in the world. It is also a wild time covering Congress, as you know. I want to ask you about the House Republican Conference and Speaker Johnson. And it's sort of it's a broad question. I think, but to get at the idea of how does a Ukraine bill, which I assume you believe it has majority support, some form of aid for Ukraine, right, in the House, yeah. How does that, help us with the decision-making process for Speaker Johnson. We've seen him make quick decisions, change his mind in some instance. He's a new speaker. We understand he hasn't chaired a committee before.
Yeah.
All of that understood. He's got a narrow margin.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, help us understand how he's making decisions and how you think any kind of deal, separate or together, actually does get through, because it seems every time there's a large group, even a majority for a direction in the Republican conference, there are enough people who are against it on one side or the other to dismantle it.
Yeah.
So what happens now, and how does Speaker Johnson, how is he handling these things?
And I'll be with him, go down to Miami tomorrow for our leadership conference. I don't envy him. I didn't ask for that job. I mean, I'm not sure, be careful what you ask for, but he, with the motion to vacate that McCarthy compromised on, it gives the ability of just one member to move to vacate. And so they're kind of like these rebel rousers, and I get that, shaking things up, but, when it becomes dysfunctional that you can't govern, then that's a problem. If we can't pass rules on the House floor, and maybe I'm old-fashioned, I've been up there 10 terms, and voting against the rule is never accepted. And it would come with heavy punishment. However, today there's none, and there's no consequence to what I would say bad behavior. I got 5 kids that are bad behavior, there are consequences. If there are none, guess what? You get more bad behavior. So we got a lot of bad behavior going on. And so.
And moderates thinking, maybe I need to act badly to get attention or get what I want in some cases.
Yeah, or you got like the FISA debate, good example, right? So now the House Intelligence are like, well, maybe we'll take down the rule. Mm-hmm. And that's an interesting debate. And, I see him surrounded on the floor, and, these conversations are not pleasant. And he's got a very difficult job. I will say the thing I admire about him is he's very intelligent, he's very calm, and he does consult with me on matters of national security, as well as the House Intelligence Chair and the House Armed Services Chair, Mike Rogers. We're known as, I guess, Huffington Post calls it 3 mics, but they do, he does draw on us as his national security resource. And,
Do you think he'd be willing to put his speakership on the line for something that was important?
So, I don't see any way of getting out of Israel and into Pacific and eventually Ukraine coming to the floor, and he's either going to have to do it, put it on the floor himself, or it's going to be by virtue of a discharge petition, which is a complete evisceration of his power, because it basically says, hey, we're going to do this without the speakers being in charge. Now, I think Republicans that would be supportive of Ukraine wouldn't support a discharge because it's really going around leadership altogether. And I think that's going to be the difficult choice for him because if they're threatening a motion to vacate, it's a very tough decision.
Julian Schäuble from Tagesspiegel, from German newspaper.
Thank you for doing this. In 2029, President Biden warned of devastating consequences in case Navalny would die. Was that another red line that has no consequences, or what should devastating consequences be, in your opinion?
And I didn't hear the first part of that.
Biden said that it should have devastating consequences if Navalny would die.
The what?
Navalny. If Navalny dies,
No.
Biden had said there should be devastating consequences.
Well,
He said that a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I don't see a lot of projection of power and strength out of this White House. So I don't know what he's going to do. I mean, and we've all said things about Navalny. I would have done secondary sanctions on Russia a long time ago. I would not have allowed the Nord Stream pipeline sanctions to be waived. I was the one that put the sanctions on Nord Stream 2, and this president waived them, sending exactly the wrong message to Putin that, hey, we're not going to sanction you, and it's okay for you to build your pipeline to Europe. And Germany, as you know, is complicit. Your former chancellor was on the Gazprom board and allowed this to happen. And now he's putting not allowing permits on LNG terminals to go to Europe. And Europe wants that. Like, we'll get off Russian energy, but we want energy from the United States. But then he's handcuffing that. And that sends a wrong message, too. So I don't know what, he'll probably have a strong denouncement. Secondary sanctions would have been a lot stronger on Russia. They've found ways to get around the sanctions currently. I think it's hurt them, but obviously they're still, and I think the secondary sanctions would have gone much further, but they're avoiding them.
And one more?
I got a long list here. Krista Case Bryant from the Christian Science Monitor.
Thanks so much for doing this, Chairman. You talked about the importance of projecting strength. I'm wondering, when you think about how the Kremlin sees Congress or the CCP sees Congress, there's a lot of dysfunction, there's a lot of division, including within your own party. How much are you concerned that that presents a national security threat to America? And is that something you've spoken with the Speaker about? And do you see any way that that can be addressed?
Very. They see our democracy as dysfunctional, divisive, and weak. Chairman Xi, when I met with President Tsai in Taiwan, she said, I talked to Chairman Xi. He says, democracy doesn't work. Democracy is dysfunctional. It's not effective. I can make a decision like that, and I can get things done, and you can't. So, and unfortunately, that's the way democracy, it does work. It is, to some extent, it is dysfunctional. It's divisive, but it's still the best form of government. But they interpret that as weakness. And when we're divisive, they see that as a sign of weakness as a nation, not a sign of debating. They don't understand debating and democracy. I'll give you another good example. Like when we did the Israel resolution, Hamas, denouncing Hamas in support of Israel, it was the most bipartisan resolution. And this came after the whole speaker crisis. And finally, that was the first bill on the floor that I introduced. And there were some, and we would say, well, we need to make this a partisan issue, and Republican versus Democrat. I said, no. And on my committee, I understand the optics of the world, how they see things. If we speak with a united voice as a united nation, the United States of America, we're far stronger than if we're projecting a divisive message. And that would have been exactly the wrong thing to do, is to turn that bill into a divided, polarized, partisan debate in Congress. We chose otherwise, and it was the most bipartisan bill ever passed. And it sent a very strong message, I think. And that's the way we should be doing things in Congress. Unfortunately, it's not working that way right now.
Lauren Fedor from the Financial Times, to your right.
Two questions. Earlier in one of your comments about the supplemental, you said there have been some discussions with the former president. Wondering if you can elaborate a little bit more on what you mean by that, how involved he is in the background here in terms of the conversations going on, particularly in the House. And then a slightly separate question. Your colleague on the Intel Committee pushed the White House this week to share information about this capability of the Russians developing vis-a-vis satellites. I'm wondering if you could tell us whether you think that was A, appropriate of him to intervene publicly in that way, and B, how concerned you are about that capability.
Well, I mean, Mike Turner and I are very good friends, and I don't question his integrity. Has it been declassified yet?
Kirby came out yesterday and
Okay.
gave brief remarks, but.
Well, I mean, you've pretty much seen it already.
Satellite.
I mean, well, you guys are good. I mean, I don't know how it's, classified information doesn't last for. I do think we overclassify too much in this country, but this is very technical, like very sensitive information. But it does demonstrate the power of a foreign adversary, and I can't get into the details since it hasn't been released. But you'll see it. I don't really question his motives. I think he's a good man, and I know that argument's been made by some that maybe against his position on FISA or against his position on Ukraine, using it to hit him. With respect to the president, I mean, I know there are people who have his ear, on Ukraine, like Keith Kellogg. Jack Keane, I know the Hudson Institute, Pompeo, they've been talking to him. He was the first president to put lethal aid in Ukraine, $300 million, and I signed off on that. So you can't forget that. And I think he's probably thinking about, do I want to be the guy that comes in to fix the problem, or was I the guy that just watched it implode or advocated for its implosion? I think only he has to make that decision, and you know where I stand on it.
And are your colleagues, though, seeking his approval before they decide how they're going to vote on this?
Well, I don't know. I will say and I've never seen. He's got a lot of control over my party. There's no question about it. And whatever he does say, it either would encourage or motivate or give them cover. That makes sense.
Okay, to the left, are you Abigail?
No, I'm Riley with USA.
Oh, sorry, Riley
No,
Beggin
it's okay.
from USA Today.
Yeah, of
Okay.
course. Thank you for doing this. Benjamin Netanyahu has said that he's against a two-state solution. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you think about the role of aid for Israel and lasting peace in the area, if they've committed to not doing a two-state solution.
It's really timely. I was just with the Saudi ambassador at a residence and with the Minister of State and Minister of Security. We talked all night about this. And I was with the King of Jordan yesterday at lunchtime. The UNRWA is a problem. We found out that members of UNRWA were part of the invasion in Israel, and we have to find a humanitarian assistance model. It couldn't happen overnight, but private NGOs that could go in to help with humanitarian assistance. I think that's a big part. Now, the King of Jordan wants a ceasefire on Ramadan. He's worried that there would be it would inflame during a religious holiday to have military conflict. Now that's about a month from now, and that's an issue to think about. On the two-state, as we talked about last night, there's a real opportunity. If Saudi signs this agreement, what they will do is sign a security agreement with the United States first, and then with Israel. So the peace with Israel would necessarily get into, look, we're going to sign this accord with you, but we want assurances that both Israel and the Palestinians can coexist together in the same region peacefully.
Do you think that would be effective when?
Now, how does that happen? I mean, some would argue Gaza and the West Bank become, Palestinian state. AIPAC supports a two-state solution. There are some people in this country that think they're more Israel than Israel sometimes, but then, I think Netanyahu is subject to more forces to his right. I think as we talked about last night, you have to play to a sense of legacy. Look, you can go down as this wartime president, or you could go down as the president who finally brought peace to the Middle East. And there's a real possibility if you have the Saudis sign up, which is no one ever thought this would happen, and all the other Arab nations, and then the Muslim nations would follow suit with Israel, that isolates Hamas and it isolates Iran, and it provides the best conditions for peace. The only thing that Saudi is going to want out of that is a way to allow the Palestinian people to self-govern in that territory.
Are you Lindsay from the Wall Street Journal? Okay, Lindsay Wise.
Thank you for having us. I wanted to ask about this loan idea, which I've also heard from Lindsey Graham, and you mentioned that you were discussing it. Two aspects of this question. What can you tell us about this idea? Is it fleshing out, where are we talking about a lend-lease type program, like the 40s? Are we talking about, something else entirely? How do you, how real is it? I mean, can you explain how it might work? And then beyond that, any changes you make, whether it's lend-lease, Repo Act, border stuff on the Senate bill, is going to add a lot of time to this process, right? Not just to write a bill, but to pass it and then maybe reconcile with the Senate somehow. I don't know if you envision a conference report, but what is, in your mind, you talk to folks all the time, you've been over there in Ukraine, our folks on the ground who report there say they're rationing their ammunition. Yep. We're entering, in a few weeks, we're entering the fighting season again. And so they're really, hanging on by their fingernails is what we understand. So given that all the options you're talking about could add time instead of just passing the Senate bill and getting it signed as soon as possible, what is your sense of how long, both so I want to learn more about this loan idea, but if you do make changes, how long are you guys willing to sort of wait through this process before it just, March, you guys got to fund the government, we're talking April, this could drag on, and the longer things drag on in Congress, the harder it is to pass them and have a sense of urgency.
Great questions. So I don't want to speak for the speaker.
Sure.
But I do think he wants to get through the appropriations process first. That takes us to March 8th, and then deal with the supplemental. Now, some would argue the supplemental could be put on top of March 8th, but just to give you the time frame, I think March. And these threats are too serious. And you're right. I mean, the Ukrainians they're given 5 rounds of 155 ammunition, and then they have to come home. And so it's one important point about this whole Ukraine aid is that 80% of it is going in to refurbish and modernize our own weapons stockpile. It's going into our defense industrial base. 80%. And I argued to McConnell, why don't you just put this in a DoD weapons account? Because that's what it is. Unfortunately, the White House, and I told the White House that too, but they're like, well, we think that would look gimmicky and people would figure it out. Okay, fine. But 80% is going into our defense industrial base. On the whole package with Israel, Ukraine, and Indo-Pacific, 60% is going into our defense industrial base. So that's important for Americans to know this. It's not just going to some slush fund in Ukraine and they think it's all corrupt. And we have 3 IGs. In the SUP, we have a special investigator, like a cigar type for like the Afghanistan one. And so all that's in place, right now. On the loan aspect, I've talked to Corning because he had the Lend-Lease bill. I've talked to Lindsay about the loan idea. I don't think the loan works with weapons because we're not going to loan ourselves money to build weapons for our own defense industrial base. But it does work, in my judgment, with government, direct government assistance. And this has been the thing that people have been hung up on. And in the Senate supplemental, there's actually a prohibition against it going into pensions, which was, maybe that was made such a big issue. But there's a prohibition. And then if we turn the direct government assistance into a loan program, and remember that the Russian sovereign assets will be able to pay back a lot of this when this whole thing's over. Hopefully this won't go on forever and we have a reconstruction. So that's the thinking right now.
Do you really think Trump would suddenly then agree to support this supplemental?
Well, I mean, I know he's come out speaking in favor of the loan idea.
I mean, this goes back to just.
And it goes back to his question,
Yeah.
who's in his ear?
Yeah.
Right. Okay, Jessica Stone from VOA.
Thank you for doing this. I want to take you to the Pacific quickly and the Compacts of Free Association, which did not make the supplemental.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
the Pacific Islands are freaking out.
Great question.
They're out of money. With so much bipartisan support, why is Copa still not funded? And will you commit here to make sure it's funded, if not on the supplemental, then via the appropriations bills in March?
This will be the most direct answer you'll get. Yes.
Oh, wow.
In fact, I'm working on it right now. Yes, on Copa.
Okay.
And I was surprised it wasn't. I was surprised repo wasn't in there.
We need to fix your mic.
I don't know what he's doing. He's like crawling around on the floor.
Start over when you finish his mic work. We can get this down.
I can project.
Yes, you can.
So, yeah, COFA was left out, and I don't know why, because that's such a critical part of our countering the malign influence of China with the island nations that they're buying off, as you know, one by one. And so we do, I advocate for a $900 million package for COFA for, the Pacific Islands. And I think that's just critically important.
Why not 2.3 billion, which was what?
Why are you shaking so much?
Okay, all right, yes.
Why 900
And then what, yeah, 900 million.
million and not 2.3 billion?
I think that was a figure we had proposed. I'd be open to other figures. But that's a really important component to the Pacific encountering the CCP that was left out. I don't know why it was, but you identify a very good point.
And you'll commit to get it passed?
Yes.
Annette Meiritz from Handels.
And this gets to a bigger question. I do think that the House is going to want to have its own imprimatur on this, right? We're not going to just rubber stamp the Senate supplemental. So I think adding repo, adding COFA, adding the loan program, all these things are really viable. But, again, they've had months to do this. We've had a couple of days to analyze it. But I think we're going to want to have our own say in this and then send it to the Senate.
Annette Meiritz from Handelsblatt, which is kind of like the Wall Street Journal of Germany.
Thank you. I have to drag you from the Indo-Pacific back to Ukraine one more time. So at the Munich Security Conference just a few hours ago, my outlet conducted several interviews with U.S. officials, with Congress members, and the topic of peace negotiations between Russia and Ukraine came up pretty frequently. I mean, a year ago it was very subtle to non-existent, and now it comes up in pretty much every conversation they had. So at least one ranking member of Congress suggested Ukraine would have to cede territory to Russia if necessary. So I wonder, what is your position on this? Should Ukraine trade territory for peace if it's necessary?
Well, both House Intelligence, Armed Services, and my committee, Foreign Affairs, came out with a report, The Path to Victory. And if y'all haven't read it, I'd encourage you to do so. What does it look like? What's the objective here? What's the mission? And again, the administration has not given them everything they need to push Russia as far out. If there's a negotiation now, the moral hazard I would see is that Ukraine doesn't have any leverage. Putin has all the leverage now. If we gave Ukraine the tools they needed to win this, and what does that look like? Pushing Russia as far out of the Donbass and Crimea, like the ATACMS and the bridge, like F-16s. They didn't have all this for the counteroffensive. Therefore, the counteroffensive was not considered a victory by any stretch. And therefore, they don't have leverage to go to the table right now. I would prefer to see that. I do think at some point there's got to be a ceasefire and a negotiation, but this is not the time. I think the appropriate time would be after we have delivered what they need to win this thing, and that winning or victory meaning pushing the Russians as far out of their country as they can, and then calling for a ceasefire, and then having an international détente, if you will.
And the territory?
I mean, that's up to Ukraine. Yeah, and again, I think they are in a far stronger position than they are today once we give them, the F-16s and the attack guns. They're putting their soldiers in places our generals would never put our troops in, with no air cover whatsoever. And they have demonstrated an ability to fight. I mean, they're very hardened warriors. And unlike Taiwan, which is soft, I'd say Ukraine is very hardened, seasoned warriors against Russia. And if Putin thinks this is going to end, it's not. They're going to continue to have an insurgency.
So it's 10 o'clock. Can you take
Yeah.
a couple more quick ones?
Yeah,
Okay,
sure.
perfect. Laura Kelly from The Hill.
Oh, thank you so much. Looking ahead to your trip to Saudi Arabia, given that a security agreement between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia would require the consent of the Senate, consent of Congress, how urgent is getting a deal done before the November election, or is it something that could be pushed off beyond November?
Well, I know that the Saudis are interested in getting this done as soon as possible. In fact, I think there will be a draft document prior to my trip in March, which makes the timing very critical. And the first phase is with the security agreement with the United States, which would involve, in exchange, weapon sales, which I would prefer to sign off on that rather than have them buy them from China. I would rather win over the Arab nations to the United States side rather than China's influence and Russia's. So if we don't do this, there's a lot at stake. And the other piece that's going to be a little more difficult is they want a peaceful nuclear energy program. Now, you could argue that that would provide a deterrence against Iran, but there would have to be sufficient controls in place to ensure that it can be converted to offensive. Now, needless to say, though, that will spook the Iranians if we did something like that. And then the second piece is the deal with Israel, which would be a real game changer in the Middle East. I've never seen anything like this, really since we had Egypt and the peace deal with Egypt.
Even Democrats are skeptical about making so many commitments to Saudi Arabia. I mean, Senator Reid said that he wants more flexibility in the Middle East, not less. In talking about a defense pact with the Saudis, what's the pathway to get this done working with Democrats? Unlikely to happen during a potential Trump or Republican administration?
Yeah, I mean, the calculus would be how bipartisan could this be today versus under, say, a Trump administration. I can't answer that.
You don't think it would be less partisan under a Biden administration?
I can't answer that. But I'll tell you that the argument to the Democrats is going to be, do you want Saudi and the Arab world to be allies of the United States, or do you want them to be allies of China and Russia? Because that's your choice. And I think we have a tremendous opportunity that if we blow this, and don't get this done, we've really blown a great opportunity.
Okay, last question, Jonathan Nicholson from Huffington Post.
Thank you for doing this. Thanks for being the most accessible of the mics. I'll try and make it two short, quick questions, if I may. One, there seems to be a gap between the urgency of the situation that you've been talking about and know on the ground. There was a withdrawal from the strong point around Avdiivka this morning. And you yourself have said in the past that you think Putin has committed genocide in the occupied areas of Ukraine. Where's the sense of urgency in discussion over, should we do a discharge petition? Should we find some way around this? You know, should we send this back to the Senate? When the Ukrainians are literally conserving ammunition.
Yeah.
Can you speak to what seems to be the gap between the urgency on the ground there and the seeming lack of urgency here in Washington? And then secondly, on the loan idea, if that's done for Ukraine, why shouldn't that be done for Israel and Taiwan as well?
Well, that last question's a good one. And I think there are considerations of that as well. Although I would argue that Israel and Taiwan are primarily military aid packages and not as much. Now, the humanitarian assistance, you have that question with UNRWA in Gaza. But the direct government assistance is unique to Ukraine. So, but that's all under discussion right now, this loan idea. On the urgency, I think there are many of us who understand that, but there are many who don't. I know that April has been the time frame for Ukraine for another potential counteroffensive. And I know that Zelensky's hired a new general, which I've gotten good reports, feedback on. And they are formulating their plans, but they need, hopefully by that time, the pilots will be trained on the F-16s. The cluster munitions will be part of the supplemental. The ATACMS will be a part, and I'm going to put the ATACMS in on the house side, Ukraine. So they can, Lloyd Austin will tell you, well, we don't have enough, but we do, actually. I know what the stockpiles are. It's classified, but this would give them tremendous long-range capability to hit the bridge between Russia and Crimea. And so, again, I think, March 8th funding deadline, and then we deal with this. And it would all happen prior to what would be their April counteroffensive. Now, they may have to delay it by a month or two, depending on how soon this can all be put in place. But they can't negotiate with any strength right now, given the position they're in.
All right. And on that note, thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, thanks, Linda.
We could do another hour, but I hope you'll come back sometime.
That was great.
All
I
right.
enjoyed it.
All right, very good.
Yeah, thank you.